Welcome, everybody. This is the Upper Dublin School District Finance Committee meeting. Today is January 20th, 2021, and I will call the meeting to order. Just say welcome, everybody. The entire Finance Committee is here. That's myself, Darlene Davis, Mike Henderson, and Stan Rotsky. We'll get right into the presentations. Andy, do you want to introduce our first presentation, please?
Certainly, I'd be happy to. So we have two presentations this evening, and we're going to get started with the results of the refunding for the Series AAA of 2021. So I'd like to welcome Jamie Doyle back this evening. I know Michael Lillies was also supposed to join us. I did not see him, so maybe he'll pop in. But Jamie's going to talk to us about the very successful results of the refunding of the Series 2015 and 2016 issues, which happened on Tuesday, January 12th. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Jamie, to give us a summary.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. And thank you, Brooke, for scrolling for me. Much appreciated. I think you're going to be really pleased with the results that we're going to share with you in the next couple of minutes. If you scroll to page number 1 of my handout, the lower right-hand corner in particular, long-term fixed interest rates continue to hover near all-time lows. Yep, it's actually page number 2. There you go. Got it. Thank you. So that was all great news for the refinancing opportunity. The next several pages are your credit rating report from Moody's. The district continues to do a great job of maintaining their AA3 credit rating. So I'll let you peruse the credit rating report at your leisure. And if we could go to page number 15, that's where the numbers start. Lots of credit rating information. There we go. On page number 15, you'll see your 2015 bonds that will get refunded as a result of this transaction. And, you know, I would just point out in column 3, the old higher rates are really not all that high. They range from a 2% to a 3.25% on the long end with a final maturity of November 15 of 2029. So as we discussed before, we're not extending the debt at all, simply just replacing those old higher rates with today's lower rates. If you scroll to the next page, we're also refinancing your 2016 bonds. You can see likewise, you have pretty low rates on the 2016 bonds to begin with, anywhere from 1.625% to 3%. And you can see those rates in column 5, with the rest of the bonds in column 3 being at 2%. So again, not extending the debt at all, just replacing the old higher rates with lower rates. Page number 17 just shows how much money we need to pay off those 2 old issues. And page 18 is the important page. In column 4, you can see the new rates, the new all-time low replacement rates in column 4 range from a 0.27% to a 0.94% in that final 2029 maturity. Those lower rates are what generate the net savings to the school district in column 11, which total $1,312,988.45. You can see that's net of the state share. The state benefits to the tune of $45,409 in that very bottom box. And the district share the savings as a net savings as a percentage of what we refunded is 7.83%. The historic benchmark is 2%. So you're darn near 4 times the historic benchmark on these savings. If you start at the top of column 11 and work your way down, you'll see that the way you'll recognize the savings is roughly $75,000 in the current fiscal year, meaning the money is sitting in your general fund right now, that $75,000, and when the bill comes in the spring, it'll be for $75,000 less than it otherwise would have been. And then the bulk of the savings will be recognized in the upcoming budget year, ending fiscal year 2022, to the tune of $1,224,338. And then the rest of the remaining years, you'll save a couple hundred to a couple thousand, but we structured it to get the savings as upfront as possible. And I would just remind you, particularly next year, I know you're probably working on your budget already, but those are one-time savings. So, you should think about using them toward a one-time type of expenditure. If you absorb them into regular operations, it'll feel like an increase when you get back to your normal running rate in fiscal year ending 2023. If you look at page 19, you can see the sources and uses of funds. And there in the middle of the page, the box labeled yield of the issue. This is the rate we'll report to the IRS. You're effectively refinancing this portion of your debt portfolio at 0.685%. So by far the lowest interest rate that you've ever locked in. And part of that is the structure. This is a very short issue. Again, final maturity in 2029. You can also see this was a premium bid, meaning the investors wanted certain coupons, and in exchange for those coupons, they had to pay you more than 100 cents on the dollar. Nothing new, you've gotten premiums before, but on this issue, the premium, that bottom calculation that you'll receive from the investors at settlement is about $2.5 million. And we use that, if you scroll back up to the top again, under sources, we used that $2.5 million of premium to downsize the amount of bonds we were ultimately reissuing. Settlement is scheduled for February 17th. And then if you scroll to page number 20, you'll see your updated debt portfolio. So in columns 5 and 6, I know this is super small to see on the screen, but the payments on the 2015 and 2016 bonds go away. And we've added column 14 to reflect the series AAA of 2021 and this transaction. The last page is just a summary of some of the highlights that I just touched upon. I would like to publicly thank Mr. Leckman for doing a great job helping us to get all the paperwork in order, and a great job with the rating agency as always. And really kudos to the entire financing team and to the board. It really is a team effort to be able to deliver results of this magnitude. So at this time, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Jamie. Any questions or comments from the committee or the rest of the board? Nice. Go ahead, Art.
Mark, I think what would be interesting eventually to look at when PFM came to us originally with all the debt options in terms of what our total debt was projected to be at. I know it was definitely more than 14 million for a longer time. So I think it would be helpful in the future, and maybe at the legislative meeting, to compare what we were concerned about in terms of how high the debt was going to be. And obviously our debt is high as a district, as reflected in the Moody's report, but it is much better news than we were concerned about. And again, a combination of just the conditions out there right now, and I think the great work that PFM does in putting all this together. So I just wanted to thank Ms. Doyle and everybody else at PFM for this. This is great news for us. And I know last month we were able to do the additional $5 million for the potential bus garage potential, and the debt is much lower than we projected out. Granted that it is still high for a district to have this type of debt, but we will have a brand new middle school, and I'm very excited about that. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone involved.
Right, I think that would be an interesting comparison to do more formally, Art. I mean, I know you and I both have been sort of keeping a running score sheet as we go, and we won't really know until we do the final borrowing next year. So let me ask that question, Jamie or Andy, the timing of that next, so we have one borrowing left for Sandy Run, which is anticipated right now to be somewhere between 5 and 10 million, depending on what we do with the bus garage and the exact amount due on the building as we get there. Is the timing of that, do we just do that in January, or is it driven by the building schedule or driven by market conditions? When exactly will that happen, and when will we know how much we want to borrow?
Well, that is a great question, and it is a combination of all of those things. But once you know a better estimate on the garage, that would be helpful. to know the exact amount you're ultimately going to need. We anticipate that market conditions, rates are going to stay low for quite some time. It's a lot of economic recovery that's going to need to occur. So not super concerned about that. But basically, the earliest you could proceed would be a sale locking in interest rates. I'll call it around Thanksgiving of this year, that could settle literally the first business day of January. That's pretty much the fastest you could proceed. But certainly, you know, if there's reasons to not go that quickly, such as you don't have your cost estimates in hand, and you know, you're still collecting those, you know, you basically have a lot of flexibility in calendar year 2022.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Jamie just said. I would add on that I don't even think cash flow is going to be an issue early in the year, right? I think we'll have time to see, to see how the project plays out, just to make sure everything is, trending smoothly through the end of the project. I think we'll have a good majority of the 2022 year to decide what that final borrowing looks like. Again, Mr. Sirota, pending significant changes in market conditions that would force us to take a borrowing earlier in the year.
All right, thank you. And so, Jamie, I'm looking at this, our current debt portfolio page number 20, and I see the next time, we have something callable. The 2018 series is callable in 2023. Is that the next time we might be visiting debt beyond that next borrowing for Sandy Run?
That's correct. And that's actually your issue that has the highest rate right now in your portfolio. And that's by and large when we locked rates in and the length of the transaction. So that's the next viable candidate. It could be earlier than 2023 if tax law changes. If tax exempt advance refundings come back, and that's something that's been an ongoing conversation since tax exempt advance refundings were taken away with the last tax law change that took effect January 1 of 2018. So it's been an ongoing discussion. If that gets some legs and comes back, we may be talking before then.
Okay. And for that next borrowing next year, previous plans have shown you sort of wrapping that into the the bulk of that debt into the 2027 to 2030 fiscal years. Is that, I presume that's still the plan?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions or comments from the committee or the board? All right, Jamie, thank you very much. Fantastic results. And we'll look forward to seeing you for the next one.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
You too, thanks. Okay, Andy, how about our next presentation?
Yes, thank you. So our next presentation is going to be on our facility condition assessment. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction and then I'll turn it over. At the June board meeting, the board authorized a contract with ICS to complete a district-wide facility condition assessment. The primary purpose of the study was to bring in an outside firm to evaluate all of our buildings as the first step in developing a long-range capital plan, and to understand the potential costs to properly maintain our facilities over the next 5 to 10 years. So I want to make sure to set a clear expectation tonight that what you're going to hear are the findings of that assessment. You will see identified needs, estimated costs associated with those findings, but I want to make sure everyone, board, community listening in knows that no one should walk away from tonight's presentation thinking that this is the final long-range capital plan. What you're going to see tonight is the starting point to developing that long-range plan. I want to thank the ICS team for their work. So the work that Phil Solomon and his team have done fully met all of our expectations on the project. And we believe what you'll hear tonight, that we have a solid base to start to build that plan on. So I'd like to welcome Phil Solomon and members of his team who are here tonight. Phil will lead the presentation. So Phil, thanks for being here tonight.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we're excited to be here, share our results. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm not sure if this is gonna advance.
You wanna try to share screens? I downloaded it onto my desktop. I think it might work. So let's try that.
Okay, so you'd have to put it in presenter mode then.
Phil, you should have the screen. There we go. Okay. Let's see. 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 Let's see
Oops.
Let's hope this works. If not, we'll just go back.
Yeah, if not, we'll go back. I'm uncertain if this will present to your screen or not. Let me just look real quick. It does.
There you
How
go.
about that? Technology at work. Unfortunately, we were struggling with this a little bit beforehand, but so yeah, brief agenda tonight. Introduce ourselves, talk a little bit about the process, take a lot of data and then boil it down into what we call like snapshots or summaries, key points, talk about funding, and then maybe just some suggested next steps. Oh, it does work. Again, I'm Phil Solomon, so I am the regional manager of ICS. I've been working in public education for a better part of 20 years doing strategic planning, design of buildings, and construction management. Bill, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having us. My name is Bill Slaughter. I'm the Director of Construction for ICS. I have 25 years experience in the construction field, and I also worked for the Central Bucks School District as their facilities director for 14 years as well. So I certainly know what you folks go through on a day-to-day basis and try to bring that information in with our reports to help you out. So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about, how this process goes about. And the first step in that process is gathering existing data. We look to the school district and try to get, as many existing plans as you have, what existing reports you have. We have surveys that we've developed to request information from your staff. And we also interview your staff before we even step foot in the buildings to know that we have a predetermined list of questions. Then we begin the building condition analysis. And by that, we walk through the building, we look above the ceilings, we go to the boiler rooms, we look underneath the floors if that's possible. We go outside, we go inside, we go on the roof, and we develop, a list of items that we see, and we take several thousand pictures that we develop and bring to you for, your files. And then we do cost estimates from the bottom up and try to determine what it's going to cost to actually replace or repair these items and when that repair should take place. So we give you when we feel over the 10-year plan that you want to work that in. We then develop a workbook and we have several reviews with your staff. And, we go through, make sure we have the data right, make sure it's in the format that the district feels is best for them. And then we set up pivot tables so that the plans can be viewed in a way that makes sense. And we give all that data to the district as their book to start out with to make a long range plan.
So yeah, just when you look at it top down, we've surveyed about 675,000 square feet. Okay, so sorry, I'm getting used to how I have to control the screen just with the mouse. So the purpose of the condition assessment is really to develop just a baseline of information. So it's a lot of data that we collect. We want to document the conditions, as Bill said, and come up with a cost to address anything that we had found. And as Andy said, I mean, this is not the plan. This is the starting point of a plan. There's a lot of other information that would need to be developed and worked through before you get your final kind of master facilities plan, if you will. But you can use all this information for ongoing facility investments, how you're going to plan out funding, and just seeing what could be in your future. So starting from kind of a 30,000 foot level, I like to start with the buildings, just kind of their key data points. So if you look, say, Fort Washington Elementary School, it's 85,000 square feet. It was built in 1969. It was last renovated in 1993, and the replacement value of that building is $26.5 million. Now, replacement value means if the building was, kind of wiped off the map and rebuilt exactly as it stands today, that's what it would cost today. So then you can work through each one of the buildings, and you come up with a total asset value of almost $224 million. So that's a lot of assets to take care of. That's a lot of assets to invest in. So, bottom line, that's what it would cost to rebuild the district as it stands today. So just taking that data and looking at it in a different way or different format, you know, your newest building that we looked at, obviously middle school will be newer, 2009, the high school, and then Maple Glen built in 2000. Then your other elementary schools here are mid 50s to late 60s vintage. So I mapped this as an age of the building. So, you know, some of your buildings are pushing 50, 60 years. That doesn't mean the building's not functional or anything else. Buildings can last a very long time. Just gives you an idea of their vintage. You know, obviously along the way, this say JARRETTOWN, it's not that it hasn't had renovations for 60 years. Obviously things have been done along the way. So what I did is I mapped it to when was the last renovation. And I put a line here at 15 years because what you'll tend to see is around 15 years, you'll start seeing big ticket items pop up. Could be a boiler, could be a rooftop unit, but things that are not in the thousands, but maybe in the 100,000s. You know, and it's just telling you that things are starting to wear out. At 20 years, you're getting to the end of a lot of the subsystems life cycles. So what you're going to start seeing is a lot more of those maintenance items pop up, and they might get deferred or they may get fixed or what have you. But it's telling you that this is a good time to plan for investment. And you know, as you can see, you have several buildings that, you know, obviously you've taken good care of them, but they're definitely pushing beyond that 20 to, you know, some of them are in the 30 years since their last major renovation. So all that said is several buildings are going to require some investment in the near term. So just to give you an idea of what the workbooks look like, and you don't have to read this, I'm just going to walk through it a little bit. We took every building and we broke it into subsystems. And then we looked, you know, when we surveyed, what were our observations? What was the condition of each subsystem? What do we recommend? And when do we recommend it? So, you know, it's essentially a whole bunch of information in a workbook, and it's prioritized. So you can kind of look at what systems are in worse condition than others. And we've rated them all and we've costed them out. And what this is it's just a massive amount of data, and the district owns it. So, you know, obviously you can use this as you're moving forward as a planning template. And we do like to see our clients use this as a living document. So when we sum up all those parts and pieces over 10 years, the numbers are large. So, you know, the infrastructure need at Fort Washington, for example, over the next 10 years is about $8.6 million. Now, I know those numbers are large, but you got to remember that's over a 10-year span. That's not all at the same time. And then when you look at all the buildings we surveyed, it is substantial, about $41 million of recommended investment in these buildings over the next 10 years. So obviously, you know, even though Jamie Doyle did a great job and found you a bunch of money, obviously she didn't find you all the money to do all the capital investments that you need. So this would have to be shaped into a plan that could be funded over, obviously, 10 years. So before I get into a little more granular data, I do want to talk a little bit about metrics. We use a lot of metrics just to check things from different angles, if you will. One of the metrics we use is facility condition index. And what that metric is just the backlog of deferred maintenance divided by that reproduction cost of the building. And it just gives you a way to convert a lot of information into one number and then compare buildings to one another. The piece that we like to look at is really this extended facility condition assessment. And that's looking at what you need for the next 10 years divided by that replacement value. And it has a scale. So, you know, 0 to 20% is a building in very good condition. 21 to 39 is in fair condition. 40 to 90 is in poor, and then critical. So then when we map your buildings, what you see is obviously your high school is in good condition, relatively new, 11 years old. You have a handful of buildings here that are in fair condition. And then you have one building that's moving into that poor condition. So all these kind of metrics are pointing at the same thing. Some investment is going to be needed in the buildings. Now, here's a good place to stop and just note something. We are really looking at the infrastructure systems of the buildings as they stand today. We haven't taken into account anything to do with educational adequacy. So obviously some of your buildings were built in the 1950s, and teaching and learning methods have changed quite a bit, obviously from the 50s to the 21st century. So some of these buildings may require additional modifications that are not just infrastructure related. So to get a little bit more granular in the data, this is laid out over a year-over-year basis, and these are just recommendations, but you can see what the recommendation is for each building in every year, and then how that sums up to $41 million. Now, as I said before, this does not account for anything what we would consider educational adequacy related. It doesn't look at demographics either. So if your demographic is growing or shrinking, it's not taking into account the amount of space you may need based on those things. From what we've gathered, looks like you're pretty stable, so that might not be an issue. Costs are done on a line-by-line basis, so we haven't looked at economies of scale. A lot of times, if you do a major renovation, you'll get some economies of scale because you're doing a lot of work at the same time. You're not redoing things. And as I said before, not the plan, just the starting point for a plan. We were just going to go through and just give you an idea of what kind of systems we're looking at when we're talking about each one of these line items. I know it's a lot of data, so a little photo tour kind of can help.
Sure. Let me take it from here, Phil, if you don't mind.
Go
So
ahead.
at JARRETTOwn, some of the things that we saw were obviously the classroom unit ventilators. They're ceiling mounted. They tend to be very noisy. There's also a lot of vibration issues with them based on the length of the shaft. You have while you did do a lot of electrical upgrades there are still some original panels to the building. There's also a outdoor mounted walk-in cooler that you have to go outside to access. So our recommendation is to replace that and move it either against the building so that you don't have to go outside to access it. There's also an abandoned oil tank on that property that, while it's been cleaned and evacuated, should probably be removed so there's no chance of it floating or any kind of issues with that. You had one newer boiler, but the older boiler was going to be replaced. Go ahead, Phil. You could just keep going.
Yeah.
Fort Washington Elementary School, we had the deck and some of the structure is rusted at the entrance canopy. Not a safety issue by any means, but we wanted to point out that should be replaced. Some of the light fixtures are getting water in them. You have some interior spaces that the cabinet work and the casework is very dated. So we're recommending replacements on that. A lot of peeling, delaminating, some door hinge problems, that kind of thing. There's multiple units on the roof that are showing their age. Sure, there's condenser fan issues, judging by the rust, disconnect laying on the ground there. So a lot of the recommendations for that as well. As the classroom unit ventilators, they're of a vintage that's probably outside of their normal life expectancy and they should be replaced. We were also informed about some drainage issues coming from Fort Washington Avenue down through the playground area there. So we had put some money in to address those issues as well. Next slide, please. Maple Glen Elementary School, again, a newer school in really good condition. Your facility staff takes good care of your building, so they should be proud of that. Shingle roof, definitely a time issue. And being that building's about 20 years old, some of the shingles are starting to go. They get dry and brittle. So again, that's something that should be considered for replacing the entire roof. Some of the boilers are at 20 years old. While they're still in good shape, there's much more high efficiency boilers. The burners are getting to the end of their life, and you probably want to do some work to those boilers if you're going to keep them. There's rebuild possibilities to that. The classroom unit ventilators, again, we're back to the ceiling mounted unit ventilators, very noisy, a lot of teacher complaints with those. They have a very long shaft that vibrates again, and it's not the most efficient or best way to handle air in this day and age. And the emergency generator, while that's in good shape, it's kind of maxed out size-wise. So as we look to keep kids in school for longer periods of time, even when there's power outages and things like that, a bigger generator with more load on it would be a benefit to the building. Next slide. FITZWATER, again, you have the dated interior work, also the vintage unit ventilators. Some of them look like they're almost original to the school. One of two boilers at that building as well. And we have some mini split replacements and some of the older rooftop units, some insulation on the ductwork, and maybe some replacement on some of the older stuff. The roof there recently replaced, in very good shape. And some things at the high school, while this is only a 10-year-old building, you know, one of the things we noticed is the lighting was not fluorescent at that time, or is fluorescent, I apologize. At that time, when that building was built, things were right on the cusp where we knew LEDs were, you know, very much of a energy savings, but the cost compared to fluorescent was substantial. So even in my district, we shied away from installing LEDs in that time frame. Now LEDs are the same price as the fluorescent fixtures. So now's a good time to get some large energy savings out of your building. This building was a LEED building, and you had a reflective roof coating to go for LEED. That roof, while not out of warranty, but in the next 10 years will be, we're recommending that you do a roof recoating, which is much less expensive, and you're able to extend your warranty on the roof by coating it. We also, talking to your staff, noticed that the pool heaters have been a consistent problem. So we're recommending that you replace the pool heaters, maybe to multiple heaters, so that you know, they don't run so hard. The problem with any kind of equipment that's attached to the pool is the chlorine tends to reduce the life expectancy of any kind of device that's there. And then we went through and toured your sports facilities. Again, we recommend that LED lighting be replaced with the field lighting. Not only does it have energy savings with better light quality, but it also reduces the amount of splay lighting. So all of your neighbors and anyone around doesn't get that outflow of lighting that normally comes from the regular lights. Also, the building that was there, the amenities building, needs quite a bit of repair. So we added that into the report as well. And some common improvements we saw at a lot of these buildings: playground equipment. There's some stuff that's aged and probably should be on the radar of replacement. There were several fire alarm systems that are at the end of their life expectancy. There was one at Maple Glen that is hard to get parts for. So here's how our breakdown by systems work. Phil, if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, I have. Sorry, it's flip screens. So, you know, Bill just kind of walked through a lot of information, and what we did here is we just broke it down into subsystems and where the investments are. And Bill had spoken quite a bit about HVAC. So the HVAC in a lot of the buildings is coming to the end of its useful life, and it will eventually wear out and need to be replaced. That will be the perfect time to add permanent air conditioning solutions to these buildings. I know there were some temporary solutions done several years ago with some, you know, window air conditioners, and that probably solved your need at that time. But the perfect time to really fully solve that need will be when you replace all that HVAC. And when you see these big mechanical systems numbers, that's what it's talking about. So mechanical systems at all the elementary schools within the next 5 years. There are also some ADA issues that would need to be addressed when you do a large enough renovation into a building where you have to bring the whole thing up to the most modern code. We did just look at this in a near term, so the first 5 years. And Andy had asked me to roll it up that way because about 70% of all the need we talked about does occur in the next 5 years. So it's definitely something that's in the near term, not kind of the mid or long term. Just going back to some metrics, you know, what do the metrics tell us about the investment that's needed in buildings? So APA, American Association of Physical Plant Administrators, they've done tons and tons of research on buildings, and they recommend investing between 1.5 and 3% of your portfolio replacement value. And there's that portfolio number again. If we roll that out into a funding dollar amount, that would be about $4.4 million a year to invest in the school district, invest in the facilities at the 1.5% level. If you take the middle school out, because that's going to be brand new, it'd still be at 3.36 million. Now, I don't usually look at the 3% number because schools can't even get close to that. It's just unrealistic. And even these numbers are a little bit unrealistic because the way schools fund things, you know, The state doesn't put much money into the districts as it is. You have Act 1 limitations, then you have tons of competing interests for that money. So obviously these big or these flat kind of $4 million a year investments are very difficult for a school district to make. What typically happens is you kind of defer as much maintenance as you can to keep the building operating correctly, and then address it all at once so you can get some of those economies of scale and kind of solve one of your building facilities while you're waiting for other things, other money to become available. This typically happens, I know Jamie was just on before, but when you have that debt that rolls off of your books and then opens up space under Act 1 to reinvest that money in your facilities. Unfortunately, the way that the high school was funded, I know that's going to be a bit of a challenge here, but you'll still have other debt rolling off. So that's how most school districts fund these kind of projects. And I usually see this funding in kind of three ways. So very short-term funding. So this is kind of your annual budget to keep the buildings warm, safe, dry, all the things that you have to do to keep them all open. There's kind of a medium-term funding, which can be funded from energy savings. Bill talked a little bit about energy savings and modern technology. Well, that can generate funding and take a good bite off of the facility need that you have. And then that longer term, these are changes that could deal with education or demographics, usually funded by debt. We typically recommend looking at a very comprehensive plan before you start making major investments. And that's just so you can make good choices, prioritizing all your buildings with the money that you do have. So as part of this, we were asked to look at what could you self-fund using energy and modern technology. And we did a whole report on this, which is available to the board. But the bottom line is about $4.5 million, or 10% of that total need, could be self-funded with what's called the Guaranteed Energy Savings Act, which is just basically using the savings to pay for some upgrades. So definitely some potential there. And if that's something you're interested in, we would look at that in the bigger picture. So tons of information. I hope I didn't bore everybody to sleep. It's kind of dry, but when you think about how this information can be used, you can use it to help you develop what you're going to need in your funding for the facilities in the near, medium, and long term. If you find that you don't have, obviously enough money to fund everything, you can prioritize buildings versus another, which one needs the investment more, even subsystems versus other subsystems. Or if you just want to address certain systems in layers, like we don't have the money to address everything, but we need to do the HVAC, we need to do this. We can develop a smart layer. So you're always building upon something and never having to tear anything out that you just replaced. And you'd be surprised how often that happens. And then you can also rack and stack the buildings and renovation, etc. So what's missing from this to plan? So some of the things I don't know is I don't know what's happening in the demographic. So I don't know if you're expanding. From what we can gather from multiple years ago, looked like you were relatively flat in enrollment. We don't know your building capacity. So capacity of a building, you would think it's a static number, but it's really not. It's based on how the principal is using that building. Sometimes you need extra special education space, so a regular classroom gets moved to that. Whatever it is, that number tends to move a little bit, and you need to understand how much capacity you have before you make big choices or decisions. Also, that educational adequacy. As I said before, modern teaching uses space much differently than what I'll call traditional or 20th century learning. So there should be a study or a match looked at that to see if these buildings are how you want them before you invest in them. And then finally, the budget to address anything like this. None of this makes any difference if you can't find the funding to do what you need to do. And what happens is, typically funding is going to drive what you can address and when you can address it. So all those things have to match together before you have a great long-term facilities plan. So our suggested next steps, obviously update a demographic study. look at the educational adequacy, and we do a lot of work in educational adequacy if that's something you're interested in. Refresh your capacity study so you can match all those things up, and obviously work through a funding plan. And then after we've gathered all those pieces, then you can make that well-informed, I feel like data-driven facility long-term plan. That's all I had. So I'm happy to field questions. I'm sure you have quite a few of them.
All right, thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you.
Questions for the ICS team from the committee or the board? Titia, I saw your hand go up at some point, but I don't see it up right now.
Yeah, that was the mistake.
Oh, Jen, go ahead.
Okay. The term dated interior was used, and I'm wondering if they could define that a little bit, because when I hear that, I just think it's like not in style anymore, but is there more to that? When you
Yes, so the interiors at the two buildings that we, I use the term dated probably is incorrect. There, a lot of it was wood wainscoting and cabinetry that is in the 25-year-old range and has a lot of abuse to it. There's nicks and dings and broken hinges and dirt marks that weren't able to be removed and scratches and maybe not the most functional of built-in furniture. So it's not just a look as much as it is a wear and tear thing. So I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. I was just curious because you said a little bit in one of the schools, and I realized you meant more than just it doesn't look nice. And then my other question is, and I'm not sure if you guys answer this or maybe Bob answer this. How many of our schools have a generator? Is it just Maple Glen? Do any of the other schools?
They all do.
They all do. Okay.
I can answer that before Bob clicks on mute. They all have them. Some of them are new. The ones that are getting towards the end of their life expectancy, we always, ask to evaluate and see. There's always stuff that people would like to add to the emergency generator to make it convenient when there is a power outage, so you don't have to dismiss school. So, at that time, increasing the size and putting items on additional load, that's a good time to do it. So, outlets in the office are typically not on the emergency generator. So to keep your administration going while there is a power outage, that's a good thing. Refrigerators and freezers, if they're not already on, keeps from food loss. Also, it's not required, but bathroom light fixtures, especially for the elementary students.
Yeah.
It's not a required thing, and they're typically left out of a project. But that's something we recommend. One light in a classroom and one light in the bathrooms, especially bathrooms that don't have windows, which a lot of them don't, or they're, mirrored off or glazed over. So that helps with the fear factor for the younger students.
Thank you.
Bill, do all the generators use the same fuel?
I don't know that answer off the top of my head,
Or
Bob.
Bob?
Lifeline.
We get away with most of the oil in the district to get away from the oil tanks. Maple Glen is the only oil generator that we still have. Everything else has been converted to natural gas. Fort Washington and Thomas Fitzwater, I think both of those generators are within 4 years old. But everything in the district, with the exception of Maple Glen, is natural gas.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Amy, go ahead.
This might be sort of a combined question for our guests and also the administration. I'm very happy that we're moving forward with this. This is, clearly overdue. I'm also a little bit concerned because some steps in this process have been done before, but sort of seem to stall. It seems like we have to now get that new demographic study, the educational capacity piece, and take some other steps. How quickly can those other things be done? And then maybe this is the administration piece. Sort of, is there a timeline for when you want to wrap up this portion of the process, or maybe Mr. Schroeder?
Yeah, so Dr. Yanni, feel free to jump in here. I mean, Ms. Francic, I think that's one of our one of our immediate next steps now that we have this process done and sort of rolled out and presented is to create a next steps timeline, which I would think would be over the next 3 to 4 months to complete all of those things that you just talked about. Updated demographic study, put together really a funding plan, which includes a couple of different pieces. So I think those are all the next steps. We would be talking about this on a regular basis. There is no intent for any of this to stall. I certainly understand the concern if that's occurred in the past, but yeah, our next steps would be to put together a clear timeline and communicate that to the board, and also continue to work with our professionals and experts here. I don't think we would just move away now and start to take this all on ourselves. There's still plenty of reason for us to continue to engage with ICS on some of this work that we have to do.
Along those lines, just to emphasize one piece, we'll be bringing forth a recommendation in the near future to do a demographic study, especially because we have some new developments coming in and some that we've talked about with the township and some that are sort of in the pipeline. We want to make sure that we do a comprehensive demographic study, because when we look at the projections from the Department of Ed, they're woefully inaccurate. So we need to do a real demographic study. They're not terribly expensive and they don't take terribly long to do, but that'll be a key point or a key part of this process.
Right, and I'll add that
Thank
of those 4 next steps that Phil laid out, we kind of know how to do 3 of them. I don't necessarily mean in-house, but we know how to get them accomplished. The educational adequacy piece is a piece that we haven't done in any formal way in a very long time. I don't know, I can't go back far enough to know when we really did a proper educational adequacy study of our facilities. So I think we definitely would need help with that one.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just speak there, I mean,
Yeah.
we use a very collaborative process. So a couple of different things. We usually work with quite a wide variety of your stakeholders. So, you have kind of the vision of, what's occurring today, and then also the vision of what you want to occur, say, 5-10 years down the line. Because when you're making facility decisions, obviously you don't change these facilities substantially every several years. It's like every 10 or 20 years. So you're kind of looking at a couple different factors of that and gathering actually quite a bit of information from teachers if the district wants to go in that way, and then compiling it into what the needs are, then prioritizing that as well. And then obviously having your educational leadership, distill all that into here's really what we need based off all that feedback.
All right, thanks, Phil. Go ahead, Stan.
Yeah, I was wondering if you came up with some strategies that we could save money by combining improvements. Just say, for example, you had that walk-in freezer. Well, if you move the walk-in freezer and you take out that old oil tank, you can save money by doing it both at the same time. Did you come up with any strategies like that for this report?
So we haven't built that yet, but that is a next step. I mean, when you start putting this together into projects, so if you're going to take the ceiling of a building out, for example, probably want to do the HVAC in the ceiling while you're doing the lighting. That's not how we built it. We built it line by line, so that your maintenance staff or whomever could come in and say, okay, we need to do lighting. It's going to be at least this. Now, the next step in this is to start making some bigger decisions, putting some funding towards it, and then developing what I call smart layers of projects, just like you're talking about. Because those layers you can get significant economies of scale by doing that. And that would be how we would start to lump it together into an annual plan, working with facilities and finance to develop how that looks.
Titya.
Yeah, so when I look at the 10-year cost for each of the buildings, that roughly seems to be about the same amount for each building, with the exception of Thomas FITZWATER. Is that that 10-year cost? Is that a typical cost for any building. So say if we're building a new Sandy Run, if we look at that at an age when it's about 10 years old, would we then expect to see about the same amount of cost in the next 10 years as you see reflected here? Or is there something very specific in each building that happens to bring the cost to the 10-year cost to about the same amount?
It is more coincident. I'd have to answer it's kind of both. So there are systems that wear out traditionally in the same amount of time. So, those things are they're going to be replaced to about 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. In your data, it's not that it's, similar. Some of them have different systems or whatever. The numbers did come together very close, but I don't think it's, I don't know if I would use that to project future costs of other buildings. It's really dependent on the types of systems you get in the initial building and their life cycle and how long they're going to last. And there's a lot of factors in that. Even when you're looking at systems, there's some systems that cost a lot less upfront, but then you have to replace them more. Systems that cost maybe more upfront and maybe have a longer life. I've done tons and tons and tons of this. What I do find is that the systems tend to equal out over a bigger piece of time, like 20 years. If you choose this one over that one and you look at replacement costs and everything else, does tend to kind of work out to the same numbers for whatever reason.
Yeah, if I could add to that also, while the costs look like they line up, they're for very different reasons. For instance, the older schools had large financial investments for sprinkler systems that weren't required by code when they were built and when they were renovated. And schools like the high school and Maple Glen have sprinkler systems in them. So, while, FITZWATER and Fort Washington require that, or JARRETTOWN, the other ones don't. So it's different systems, but it's ending up at the same cost, unfortunately. So you wouldn't expect, my point was, you wouldn't expect that cost for the new middle school because you would have a sprinkler system. You would be ADA compliant, for those kinds of items.
I'll add that I earlier asked a question along those lines. Had they built in the sort of triggers you might hit that require either ADA or fire system protection? Because when you do a certain amount of renovation, you may be required to bring it up to code, as Phil said earlier. And those are not necessarily built in, because if you sort of do it piecemeal the way this list is written, you don't hit those triggers. But if you were to do it by bundling into smart layers, as Phil puts it, you may reach those triggers. Did I get that right, Phil?
That is correct. Now, the flip side of that is that you get economies of scale. So you got to look at it both ways.
Right. Yeah. No, I wasn't advocating that.
Yeah. No.
Trying to avoid doing ADA improvements. Yeah.
So just as a follow-up, then these kind of costs, those 10-year costs, are they somewhat typical for the age and the size of the buildings that we have, or are these?
Yeah.
No,
they are typical. Absolutely. You're not an anomaly where, we've let things go and, now we have all this. It's just the cost of maintaining buildings. School buildings are, think about, they're used every day and by so many students that the systems, they do wear out. And, you've done a good job maintaining your buildings. Just so happens that some of your renovations lined up at the same times. So, what happens is you invest in a building and then you enjoy kind of relative period of not having to invest in it when you build them or you renovate them all at once. And then guess what? It comes due again almost at the same time. And in some ways, it's better to have them staggered so you don't have these big investments all coming due kind of in a similar timeline. But, you build buildings based off of demographic need, not based off of, perfect budgeting, unfortunately.
To be clear, Phil, just to rephrase that in other words, every school district has a list like this.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Actually, your list is not nearly as bad as most districts. I mean, you have, relatively new buildings. You've kept them in good shape. We've done tons of surveys at School District of Philadelphia. I mean, I don't think any of their, even your worst building looks as good as their best building. So, you know, every school district has a list like this. This is not unique to Upper Dublin.
All right, Art, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief, and this is directed to the administration. It's, if there's one silver lining with the pandemic, it's that we broke the mold of how we used to do things, and we're looking at future. We're looking at the future. My concern is we don't want to slip back to what we've always been doing. We want to see, we want to take lessons of what we've been doing with the academy, with blended learning, and try to fit that in our new facilities in terms of, you know, in terms of what we need in the brick and mortar to deliver what I think will be a new educational model for the future. So I know those discussions are beginning, and they have to continue, and we just don't want to slip back, you know, and just do all these renovations and be where we were 20 years ago, but with nicer buildings. We want to look and see how is the educational model for the future, and how are we going to deliver that in Upper Dublin.
Any other comments or questions on this presentation? All right, thank you very much, Phil, and the whole ICS team for the work and the reports. We have a lot to digest. We have a lot of next step planning to do. Andy, I assume we'll see something about this on the agenda every month for the next few months going forward at Finance Committee meetings.
I think you're correct.
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
All right. Next up on the agenda, we're up to announcements. Mr. Leckman, any announcements?
I do not have any announcements this evening.
All right. Thank you. We do have minutes from the December 16th meeting. Members of the committee have had a chance to look at those, and we do need to review them here at the meeting. Are members of the committee prepared to move those, to finalize those minutes?
Yes, we're ready.
Yes.
Mike? Well, I don't hear Mike, but that is enough. So those minutes are approved, and they will be, they will appear on the legislative agenda as an informational item. So we're up to reports and recommendations. Let's do the Sandy Run Middle School update. Is that Bob?
I'll start with that. I guess the best way to put it is contractors continue to chug along. Weather has been cooperative again for the beginning of this winter. The heavy rains and the brief snow that we had didn't stop them. There was enough of the building under cover, under roof, with windows in place that a lot of the work is continuing. Some of the latest progress that we've been seeing is the ground floor of the classroom wing. Drywall's been completed, finished, and the first coat of paint's going on. The block sealer, the block around the outside windows is being painted. The windows are caulked in, and we can finally see the colors. I expect to see ceiling grid starting to go in the next couple of months on that ground floor. Mechanical systems are going in. Our commissioning agent started having meetings with the contractors, the controls contractor, the mechanical contractor. So they're really gearing up to get things started. The temporary heat that they installed has greatly been helping. Fireproofing all the steel outside of the classroom wing, everything structural steel needs to be fireproofed, and temperatures have to be right. So the Skepton brought in some heat. We have plastic around the areas where the walls aren't completed yet, so that fireproofing can continue. The temporary heat's also helping out with all the concrete floors that are going in. Cafeteria is done, kitchen's done. The only floors that are really being held out right now are the music wing, auditorium. The ramp has not been paved yet, and the gymnasium floors are not ready to go yet. More so with the gymnasiums because they're finishing up the roofs in those areas, getting the roof drains connected so we can get it dried out. Right now, concrete's a little muddy or I'm sorry, the dirt's a little muddy, so it's going to be a little bit before we can do paving in those areas. But they are moving right along. Roofing work is very close to being completed. Audits they've been working up on the auditorium, the gymnasiums, all that is really coming along.
Several of us on the board have had a chance to tour the building over the last week or so. And I will say, especially that classroom wing is really starting to feel like a school. It's kind of exciting to walk through. Andy, anything to call our attention to on the budget update?
No, there are no major changes on the budget this month. So I'll take any questions you have, but I have nothing to report.
All right, comments or questions on any of this from the committee or the board? All right, thank you for that update. Hope that progress continues at the same impressive rate it's been going. Let's talk about the retest results of the water fountains.
Yes, this was the last minute item because we got results back just a few days ago. Last month we talked about, we did our semi-annual lead and copper testing that we're required to do for Fort Washington and Upper Dublin. And we had some water fountains at each school come back high in lead, which is extremely surprising. All the water fountains do have lead filters. The surrounding area, classrooms, places we've taken the water samples from didn't have any lead. So why these water fountains? We believed it was a mistake during the analyzing in the lab. Something just wasn't right. So we immediately did a retest on those fountains. I'm happy to say the results came back that there was no lead. It was just about non-detectable on the results. It was below 0.001 on the results. So they really just couldn't even put it on the paper. So it's just about non-detectable, which is what we expected. We didn't think we were going to have any problems, but the safest way to go about this was just turn those water fountains off until we got the test back. So now we can turn everything back on and we're in good shape.
All right, comments or questions? All right, Titia.
I just want to say thank you for the follow-up on this, because I think this is, given the history of all of this, really important. And I am very glad that it was caught and or noticed and reacted on. And now we can rest assured for until the next testing cycle. So thanks so much for the attention to this.
You're welcome.
Darlene.
Yeah, as well. Thank you so much for the follow-up. Did they give you any sense of why those first tests came back incorrectly?
No, we weren't able to figure out. We don't know if there was a contamination in the sample bottles that we used or if it was at the labs. We spoke to the people who were at the labs doing the testing. Our water operator was the one who took all the samples. I immediately called him up. Could you have mixed a bottle up? We went through every scenario. We don't have a good scenario, just somewhere along the line, something got contaminated on the samples, and we weren't able to pinpoint it, but the best way was just follow up and retest, because we knew those results weren't correct.
Now, you definitely indicated that when we got those first, results. So I'm glad to hear that we're in good standing.
Yep. Yeah, and I appreciate it. It was handled smoothly and well, and we hope we don't have to run into that sort of scare in the future. Let's move on to the transportation facility feasibility study.
Yes, I will give the update on that one. Thank you, Mr. Sirota. So we went through, as the board is aware, an RFP process for the proposed transportation facility, a feasibility study. The RFP process is complete at this point, and what I provided in here is my write-up, a summary of the proposals that we received. So the RFP was posted on our website for anyone interested in submitting a proposal. We also did send it directly to 5 firms and let them know that we were interested in them submitting a proposal. Of those 5, 4 participated in the mandatory on-site meeting for anyone interested in submitting a proposal. And of the 4 that participated in that on-site meeting, 3 submitted proposals. And the other just let us know they weren't interested. They didn't have capacity to participate at this time. So we received proposals from Dewey Engineering, Michael Johnson Architect, and EI Associates. We did feel that all proposals that we received were well done, understood the requirements of the project, and all three were qualified to do the work. At this point, we are recommending that we move forward with Dewey Engineering for this study. Basically, with all of the criteria of the proposal being very, very similar, Dewey's proposal was the lowest pricing at $15,000 compared to around $28,500 for the other two proposals. Additionally, Dewey's proposal included a waiver of the $15,000 fee if they would be selected to manage the project should it move forward. I think that's a consideration, but certainly not something that's driving the decision. Certainly we have no long-term agreements for this project. Obviously, all we're working on right now is a feasibility study. And once the feasibility study is complete, then we would decide how to move forward with the project, but it's certainly something to note. Both Dewey and Michael Johnson's proposals included recommendations for additional work that we should consider as part of this feasibility study. They both talked about a land survey and utility survey and geotechnical investigations on the site just to look at what's underground and make sure everything, there's no surprises waiting for us underground. We do know that obviously there, that was used as a trash site at one point in time. So we just definitely want to look into the ground and see if there's anything that we need to be concerned about. Dewey did quote us $9,500 for this work. For the land survey and utility survey specifically, and Michael Johnson was $14,800. So again, Dewey was a lower projected cost for that. The geotechnical study, we only have an estimate for Dewey at this point. Dewey has recommended that really the land survey and utility survey are the most critical to do early on in the project, and then we can talk about geotechnical later. If we would approve Dewey and move this forward to the January legislative meeting, Dewey would be estimating a draft report in April and a final report in May for the feasibility study. So it's about a 3-month project to get this done. And then the proposals included draft contracts. So we already have a draft of Dewey's proposed contract. If we move this forward, it's already been preliminarily reviewed by our solicitor. And we do have a draft ready to go for Monday night if we decide to move this forward. So that's a summary of the proposals we received, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, Andy, I know that you and Bob did talk to Dewey to try to ascertain whether that, why their number was roughly half the price of the others. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, really, Dewey's response to that was pretty simple. We spoke with Arif directly. Arif said, "Yep, we know the district, we know the township. We already are doing a project on site, so they feel they're well positioned to do this work at a lesser cost." So that's really the extent to what they provided.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have comments or questions? Titia?
Thank you. Has Dewey or any of the other ones done a transportation facility before? What's their experience with this particular type of project?
Yeah, I think part of the proposal was all firms needed to submit, similar type projects that they've done in the past. So they all have done, maintenance facility, transportation type facilities. I don't have the exact references off the top of my head, but certainly I can pull that from the proposal. But yes, everyone submitted similar type projects that they've been part of.
Okay, thanks.
I will remind the rest of the board that in 2018, when we were discussing a somewhat different proposal as a joint project with the township, a larger possibility, we did actually do a geotechnical survey of this site. And you can actually see the results of that in the August 2018, I think it was August. It was called the Operations Committee at the time. If you look back at those minutes, the reason, and I questioned, so why do we need to do another one? Bob had a good answer, which was because at the time we were looking at a different project with buildings and fuel pumps and stuff in different locations. And so we may need to do that again. Did I get that right, Bob?
Yes, the original proposal for the joint building had the facility in the middle of the playing field, the Field of Dreams. Now we're looking at the surrounding areas. We didn't look exactly where the building was proposed on the 2009 drawings that we were looking at for land development. So we need to be right at that building level. We also didn't do the core samples for soil compaction. These were more test pits that we dug. The township helped us out with that. They supplied the labor and the machinery. So we did dig pits to make sure there was no trash, but there was nothing that was taken sample-wise for compaction from cores or from the actual building site where we're looking to place the building now.
All right, thanks for that clarification. Any other comments or questions on this? Tizia, you have another one?
Yeah, I'm sorry. When I look at the last line of the summary that was just presented, it says it talks about the oh, where is it now? Can we scroll down?
The last line is in May and June authorization
Yes.
to proceed.
Yeah. So what does that mean? The project. What? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what all that means is that when you look at Dewey's presentation, they're looking to present the final feasibility study in the April-May timeframe. And then I think we would be looking to make a determination as a finance committee and ultimately board, do we move forward with the next stage of the project, right? So this is just feasibility study. Then once we know, yes, it's feasible, now how do we proceed with the next step of the project? That's all that means.
Right,
Okay.
it seems to be presuming that the answer of the feasibility study is yes.
Correct.
Which we don't know yet. But assuming it is, then I think they're saying then we would go ahead and, hire an architect and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I just wanted to make very clear. It doesn't mean that then right away their plans they're already there and everything. It's just, okay, we know it's feasible. And the next step is to potentially, if we decide that we want to do this, then to move on to the next step. So it's not that suddenly there's a building being built.
That's a good clarification. Thank you.
And Andy, can you clarify, a feasibility study will tell us that all the stuff will fit on the space, and it will also tell us how much or an estimate of costs and that sort of thing? Is that, can you explain exactly what a feasibility study will tell us?
Sure, right. I mean, it's going to look at the land. It's going to make sure the land will support the building, the size of the building. It will look at township and land requirements to make sure, coverage is okay. Yes, it will look at estimated costs once we know all that estimating costs and make sure it fits into our proposed $5 million budget on this. So yes, it will do all those things, and then we will know we have a feasible project to move forward with or not.
Okay. Darlene.
Yes, I think it's important that we have this feasibility study done so that we make some big decisions on how we're going to move forward. So I do support moving this to our agenda so that we can get, the information we need to make some decisions moving forward. And because theirs is the best price and they're here, I think it makes sense to go with Dewey.
All right. Seeing no other comments or questions, members of the committee, are we in support of moving this forward to the legislative agenda?
Yes, go ahead, move forward.
Let's move forward.
All right, I agree. So we will move that forward to the legislative agenda. And we'll move on to the monthly financial reports.
Yes, thank you. I do have some things that I do want to cover tonight. So first off, in the treasurer's report for December 2020, as you look in there, you'll notice that the total revenue collection is 85% as compared to 82% in the prior year. So we are ahead primarily due to property tax collections, again, which you see more detail on in the other financial reports. So the collection percentage as of the end of December ended up being 97% as compared to our budget of 95.3%. So again, I'll cover that a little more in the other report. Expenditures continue to trend ahead of the prior year through December at 43% compared to 41%. But again, I want to make sure we note that most of that being ahead right now is a result of the construction fund owing the general fund $3.6 million as a reimbursement for the general contractor payments. And again, that was planned and expected until we received kind of the larger bond issue that just settled in January. So we will now reimburse the general fund. And that will kind of come back down and level set. So factoring out that adjustment, which will occur in January, the general fund is trending below the prior year by about $1.4 million, or 40% of the budget spent compared to 41. In the other funds, I just note, just because we heard about capital projects tonight, just a note that Capital Reserve Fund has an available balance of about $5.5 million for capital projects. So again, you heard tonight $30 million over the next 5 years. So we have much work to do around that planning, organizing, prioritizing, funding strategies. But it's just important to note we don't often talk about that. And then again, the food service fund continues to do well financially, earning about almost $53,000 in December. The bundle program continues to be extremely successful, but some of this success, the $53,000 gap revenues over expenses for December, is primarily due to significant staffing shortages that we're facing in the food service department right now. So Kristen Deli continues to do exceptional work, and her team, her entire team, but that's some of what's driving that. We are actively looking to fill open positions in that department. In the other financial reports package, page 2, so Brooke, I'm switching to the other package, page 2. Montgomery County seems to be lagging behind our monthly finance committee meeting. So what you'll see on this month's assessment report includes the November county updates. So as of last month, we didn't actually see November. So we're catching up now. And you can see that we are still well ahead of our budget by about $8.8 million assessed value, primarily due to assessments from new developments, specifically the Enclave. I still find it important to mention every single month that commercial settlements have commercial property assessment appeal settlements have reduced total assessed value by about $10 million. And 18 new assessments from the Enclave have only filled in about $5 million of that assessed value. So we remain about a net negative of about $5 million. Again, still ahead of budget, but some of these new developments are just filling in what we've lost this year in commercial appeals. Small on our total assessed value of $2.3 billion, but again, important to note because new revenue being generated from these new developments are not generating new revenue at this point. One other thing to note, I did add on here just as a point of reference. You'll see next to October and November under the Enclave, there's numbers in parentheses. So you see October, there's a 5, and November, there's a 13. That's actually how many homes were assessed in that month that make up that total assessed value. So you can just get a sense of volumes of homes that are being assessed. Page 3, local tax collections completed as of December 31st. So this is where you can see here highlighted in yellow, you can see that we had an actual collection percentage of 97% of taxes billed as compared to, Brooke, if you scroll down a little, I think it's 97.3 from the prior year there. There you go. So again, tax collections remain strong this year. Brooke, if you scroll back up just a little bit, please. Sorry there. I think it's important to note that it did occur just as we expected. So face amount of collections in December was about $2.7 million. As compared to last year, we only collected $357,000 in December. So again, we expected that. I just point that out. It came in exactly as expected. We eliminated the penalty percentage for this year, and residential and commercial properties did wait kind of right until the end of December to pay their taxes. Page 4, EIT continues to trend in line with prior year. So, things are looking good there. We did actually meet with Berkheimer today as part of our Montgomery County Tax Collection Committee, which is all school districts and townships across Montgomery County. And Berkheimer said they're seeing this trend, I guess, which is a good trend to be seeing, that EIT remains strong across Montgomery County. And they're going to look to update some of their projections that they use. So they're not seeing negative trends anymore, which again, I think is a good thing. And then the last thing I'll point out here, and then I'll take questions, on page 6, our grant funding. So the new federal stimulus money, which was enacted on December 27th, included $53.4 billion for ESSER 2 funds. So this is a new set of grant funding that'll be available for school districts. The funds were allocated to states from the federal government based on a proportion of funding each state received under Title I, Part A. And under this calculation, Pennsylvania received about $2.2 billion, which is then allocated to school districts and charter schools based on their Title I-A funding, their proportionate share of Title I-A funding. So you can see on here that we will, Upper Dublin School District is projected to receive about another $550,000 in funding, which we'll be able to spend out through September 2023 if we need to. So that's another positive thing that's happening. One important note I just thought anecdotally to share, cyber charter schools in Pennsylvania are estimated to receive over $45 million of this funding based on the allocation. So that's 9 cyber charter schools receiving $45 million to prepare their schools for COVID-related issues. So I'll stop there and I'll take any questions.
All right, I have 2. One is on this report while we're still here. I just wanted to note on the tax collection report, which is page 3, the penalty, so changing our penalty period to the end of December reduced total penalties collected from 51 million over that period, 51,000 over that period to 6,000. So that does appear to have been effective as we expected in terms of, again, played out the way we expected it to play out. On the other document, I have a question for you. You talked about the reimbursement for the capital charge to Skepton. Will that show up? Does that reimbursement end up showing up as a revenue, or does it end up balancing the expense line in future months on this report?
Yeah, it will balance the expense line item.
Okay.
So it'll come over and it'll offset the operations line item, the 2,600 line item.
All right, good. I just wanted to know where I should be looking for it in the future. All right, any other comments or questions on the financial reports? Art.
Good question, Andy. I read an article a couple of days ago about the gaming money has been reported to be approximately 20% less than anticipated. Do you know when we get a first look? Because I'm really concerned about how it's going to affect our budget next year, if it continues or if it even worsens.
Yeah, Jen, keep me honest here if you have that. I think it's May 1st that the state has to certify that number. We usually don't get Sometimes PASBO will help if they are hearing anything from the state, but usually we don't get a good sense of what that number might be until the state certifies it.
But I think it's a concern we need to continue to remind the community that we take it for granted that we get the $350 something, yeah, deducted from, and it may not be that, and it may show that it's an increase that the district is creating, but it's not. It's that money that we tend to assume. Andy, all this money that goes to cyber charter schools, they're cyber. What are they supposed to be doing with that money?
You're asking the wrong guy.
You're asking a question I can't answer, Dr. Rabinowitz, but I think it's a valid question. It's a function of the dollars are allocated based on the Title I proportional share. So all cyber charters get a Title I allocation, so they get a large chunk of the ESSER dollars.
It's a twisting. I'm just making a point, Andy. You know.
Yep.
Another example of Pennsylvania's broken charter school funding system.
Yep.
So everyone, please write to your legislators on that issue, on all of these related charter school issues. All right, anyone else on monthly financial reports? All right, let's move on to budget transfers. Anything you want to point out to us here?
Small transfers this month. I don't have anything specific to highlight.
Does anyone have any questions on budget transfers? All right, tell us about another successful audit.
Yes, so again, we've covered all the numbers from 1920. All this basically is the report that shows you everything that we've already talked about in our results from last year. So every year, school districts must have a full audit of their financial statements and internal controls completed by an independent auditor. So we use Gorman for our audit. They've delivered a final copy of the audit, which is included here for your review. I do actually also have hard copies for any board member that would like a hard copy of that. So we'll figure out how to get that to you. Usually we see each other and I hand it to you, but I can't do that tonight. While there's a ton of valuable information through this report, again, it's 100+ pages long. Definitely take a look through it, but the most important pages, I think, for you to be aware of are pages from a governance standpoint, are pages 115 and 116. And basically what those pages tell you are that the auditors have issued an unmodified opinion at the conclusion of their review. And that simply means that it was a clean audit. And there were also no findings issued or reported by our auditors. So I think that's another well done, and kudos and a thank you to Jennifer Baldessano and our business office team for all of the great work that they do throughout the year to achieve that type of result on the audit. That is not just the result of a 1 week process or 2 week process with our auditors. That's a result of a year's worth of tremendous work. So if there's any specific questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you and congratulations to the team. That's several years in a row of excellent audits, and it's kudos to everybody. Go ahead, Art.
Just want to echo your remarks, Mark. I know how much time is spent preparing for the audit. I know how many days that the auditors, plural, tend to stay in the district. I'm not sure if they were physically in the district. I just know how much work is involved being on the board for 20 years. And I'm so proud of our business office and both Andy and Jen and their entire staff for continuously getting a clean audit. And thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions on the audit? Okay, let's move on to the Eastern budget.
Yeah, so each year, member school districts are required to take action on the budget for the Eastern Center for Arts and Technology. So Eastern and IUs need to do the same. Eastern and the IUs are way out ahead of school districts in their budgeting. So I actually applaud them for the work that they need to do this early in the process. You know, they already have a proposed budget in our hands for consideration for the 21-22 school year for next year. So what I've attached here are all the information that Eastern has provided to us. You have a proposal, a memo with a summary, you have the full budget document, and it's all there for you to review. I'm going to hit some of the highlights, and then certainly I will do my best to answer any questions. Certainly I think either Dr. Yanni or Dr. Levinowitz can help to answer any questions. And if there's anything that we can't, we'll reach out to Eastern for more clarification. So some of the key highlights. So this is the second year in a row that Eastern has completed an operating budget that calls for a 0% increase in district contributions. Operating expenses are divided among all of the participating school districts in the same portion as the average daily membership of students enrolled from each district for the 3 school years immediately preceding the coming budget year, including the current year. So it looks at 2021, 1920, and 1819. And page 19 of their budget document explains that the calculation in full detail. In addition to the operating budget, Eastern is continuing its plan to fund a 10-year capital plan to maintain its facilities. So Dr. Poznarski was with us last year to kind of introduce that to the board and talk about all of the facility needs they have on a building that really hasn't been had any major renovations in many years. So funding of that capital plan was something that they talked about last year, and they're continuing that this year. Page 21 of the budget report provides more details on that specifically. In 2021, Eastern requested $750,000 from all districts, all 9 member districts, and our portion was about $113,000. In order for them to continue funding their $12.5 million worth of projects, Eastern requires a contribution of about $800,000 this year from member districts. Eastern actually, they had a surplus at the end of last year, and they transferred that into their capital projects fund. So they were able to reduce the request to $550,000, and our portion of that is a little over $105,000. So the proposed budget for 2021-22 projects our costs at $572,560 as compared to about $584,000 last year. It's about a $12,000 reduction. And just a note from the report, Upper Dublin we currently have about 40 students attending Eastern, which is up from 32 in the prior year. So those are the highlights. I'll do my best to answer any questions that you might have. And Dr. Levinowitz, certainly feel free to add if you feel like I've missed anything.
All right, yeah, do you want to say anything about this before I go to questions?
Well, just a few comments, and we are making significant renovations in the building. I can't wait for my colleagues to visit the building again. You won't recognize it, and I think our goal, and we've also expanded the programs at Eastern. We've increased some enrollment in some of the programs, and we also started a robotics and automated technology program. That space was completely created this past summer. We're very pleased with Breslin. We are actually using Breslin to do a lot of our work. We have a new roof that is on the building right now. And we are in the planning process of yet another program. So again, when we add programs, it doesn't affect really the budgets for the sending districts. The budgets remain the same because it's always based on the number of students that are sent. I wanted to thank the administration for increasing that number over the past few years. I think we're still missing, I don't think we're taking advantage of what Eastern has to offer to the max. I think there's still more students in our high school that would definitely benefit from Eastern, and I know we're developing some strategies to do that. But that's, and I appreciate, I would ask for the support of my colleagues to move this budget forward. Again, there is a slight reduction. Understand also that the capital budget that we do, it's not based on number of students. It's based on the step values of the districts. Our step value it's quite high. If you look at that page in the budget, that's why we are paying a significant amount of money compared to some of the other districts.
Yeah, I think as we visit the high school schedule, that may be a contributing factor to getting more students over to Eastern in the future. Any other comments or questions about the Eastern budget? Do we foresee, I don't know, Andy or Art, if you can answer this, do we foresee the capital portion of the Eastern budget staying flat for the next few years? Or is that, or, is this a couple of year we need to build it up, or is this a long-term ramp up, or what is this, what's the expectation there?
There was a 10-year estimate completed. I believe Dr. Yanni and Andy has seen that, but we're going to continue to try to offset that in these times, financial challenges that we all have. This year, as Andy indicated, we were able to do 250,000 reduction. You can do the math. It's a little over 12 million over the 10 years where we just completed. This is year 2. There's, I think, I don't have available with me at this point in terms of what our maximum amount would be, but we can get that to the board next at the legislative meeting. I think either Dr. Yanni or Andy, or I can get that from Dr. Bliznarski. It is more, but it's not a lot more. I mean, we are capping it to I think it's maybe a little over $1 million, I think, a year, but I don't have that information now.
Okay. Anyone else?
And let me just add one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
What Easton is doing an excellent job compared to years ago. We have applied and we have gotten a number of grants from both the state and federal and from different agencies under the state. And we continue to pursue those funds to help us offset the costs for the district. I really have a problem with the way CTCs are funded. It's like a double whammy to districts. I'm sure Dr. Yanni would agree with me. And it's almost penalizing you for sending kids to Eastern, but we should be sending kids to Eastern. So, I am working, we really do need to look at state funding for CTCs and how that can change. And I think it's becoming more and more obvious to us. We get penalized for sending kids, but we want to send kids to Eastern. And it's a very expensive program. If you look at what we pay, divide that by the number of students, you see how much additional we're spending for that. And it really needs to change.
I'm not really comfortable with the word penalized, but I understand your point.
Well, in a sense, we are, yeah.
Go ahead, Jen.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when we toured it last year, and this was before the renovations, I was impressed by the students who were so enthusiastic about what they were doing. And I tell people now, like, hey, consider this when your child gets that age, at least go look at it, because really the kids are so excited that the automotive program, the veterinarian program, they have great stuff.
Yeah. The sense there is palpable of just like, many of our kids love the extracurriculars that they do, or the non-core subjects that we offer. I think a lot of the kids, going to Eastern is what makes them get up in the morning. So you really do have that sense when you go through the building. All right. So members of the committee will move this one forward to the legislative meeting.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. I didn't hear Darlene, but that is enough. I agree.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you, Darlene. And we'll move on to the wireless transition to T-Mobile.
Darlene knows Eastern very, very well. And personally had a child that went through Eastern. And I remember the days that we first met, and she can speak of the many successes of Eastern.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks. All right, moving on to the wireless provider transition.
Yeah, so this is an informational item, but it's one that I think is important to talk about here, just to share the good things that we continue to do. We're not leaving any stone unturned as we're looking around and looking for ways to save money. So over the past few months, we've actually, as we monitor expenses, we've noticed an uptick in fees with our current wireless provider, which is Verizon Wireless. As we started to dig into that a little further, into our plans with Verizon, even down to the user level, what we found was that we actually have a plan that there was no uniformity to our plans. We were paying in some cases additional fees for overages on minutes and data because we didn't have plans, unlimited plans or district-wide plans. And over the last few months, working remotely, not being in the office as much, we definitely experienced an uptick in costs there that caused us to take a good hard look at our, where we were at with Verizon and if there was a way to save. But we also at the same time had a representative from T-Mobile reach out to us interested in partnering with us. So Mr. Patel, our technology director, did connect with both T-Mobile and Verizon Wireless and worked with both to come up with some Verizon to see if there's anything they could do to save us money or get us onto some, better plans, and T-Mobile to see what they had to offer. And after we received both of those, we've determined that it's in our best interest to make a transition to T-Mobile. We're estimating monthly savings of about $600 from this transition. And basically highlights are we'd be receiving smartphones at no cost for all lines. And I think this is important because we currently have some folks across the district, like head custodians and our maintenance workers, who are out there, constantly moving around. They don't have really an office or a desk to work at. These folks have flip phones that they're using as part of that cost we're paying Verizon. So we really feel that there's efficiencies that can be gained by putting some smartphones in their hands. They can take pictures, send videos, to Mr. Lesser and Matt Toner, our supervisor of operations. You don't constantly have to be going places to see what's going on. T-Mobile was also much more willing to earn our business than Verizon was to keep our business. That's just the way it felt as we went through the process. So we feel this is the right change. And lastly, as we have with Verizon, with T-Mobile, there are no long-term contracts or commitments. We are on a state contract priced month-to-month fee agreement. So, if we made this change and we weren't satisfied, even with the free phones that they'd be offering to us, there's no costs or there's no cost to transition back to Verizon if we so wanted to. So we feel like this is a no-brainer to make this transition. So thank you to Mr. Patel and his support and the work he's done to kind of get this off the ground. So I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, Stan?
Yeah, I don't know if we can answer this. Can anybody hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Do we have any policy on the use of these phones, whether or not, just say, a staff member goes on the internet and downloads videos and shares it and and instead of working, they're entertaining themselves, being on internet sites. Do we have any policy on that? And would there be any restrictions on staff of what they can do if they're able to log on to the internet while working?
So Dr. Yanni, keep me honest here, but yeah, we have acceptable use policy for use of any technology devices that are issued by the district to any district employee. Would cover all of those things you just mentioned, Mr. Robsky.
Yeah, and also general employment, it would be covered by other employment requirements as well. So I think to answer your question, there is no specific policy on technology for staff, but there are general policies that would cover all those kinds of issues. Anyone else? All right, so that's just informational, nothing else to do there. So we are up to community input. So if members of the community would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand and I will call on you in the order that your hands go up. A reminder that we do have a 4-minute rule and the timer will show on the screen. And a reminder as well that the meeting is being recorded. So first up, Anita Brister, go ahead.
Hello.
You'll have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, Anita Brister, Fort Washington. I still have a lot of concerns about the bus garage project. I probably won't get to all of them in 4 minutes, but I'll do my best. So first of all, I think everybody on the board knows by now that we were already taxed for this in the high school project that was passed via a referendum back in 2007. So we were already taxed for a bus garage, and yet it never happened. There's still many outstanding questions. I went through some of them in November. I took a little break in December. I'm sure you're all glad, but I still have questions. So the first one would, I hope you'll answer some of them tonight. I've heard from other taxpayers, I never got a direct answer from any board member, that the original cost of the of the bus garage was $3.6 million. So I'm hoping somebody can verify if that's accurate or not, but that's the figure I'm going to use because that's what I've heard. So I'm looking, I have in my phone a copy of one of the Cardinal notes. For anybody who doesn't know, we regularly would get well, I'll say regularly, I think about 4 times a year, especially before the referendum, every household was getting Cardinal notes to describe the project. Right under the total cost of the project, which was 119 million plus some change, it clearly says on the copy of the one I have, includes bus garage. So it was definitely included in the cost of the new high school. It was advertised that way for many, many, many months, maybe even closer to a year before the referendum. But we didn't get what was promised. And we still don't know basic answers like, well, where did those funds go? I've heard there's an audit. I guess I can put in a right to know request for the full audit. But it seems to me that board members by now shouldn't be able to answer where did those funds go. And it really just doesn't seem ethical to me to be taxed twice for the same thing. I do think there's a fair remedy, which of course nobody is mentioning, but the only fair remedy I can really think of would be, because I understand you do need something for your buses. I'm not sure you need a $5 million bus garage. It's a whole nother issue. But a fair remedy would be that you reduce the millage, the school district millage, equal to the $3.6 million that we were promised something that we didn't get. So if you were willing to reduce the millage and say, whoops, somehow a past board messed up, then maybe that would at least be a fair remedy. And then you do whatever you're going to do with a future bus garage. But to just pretend that this isn't a problem, I really think there's a higher standard when something was advertised for a good long time before a referendum. And it's basically a promise was not kept. And I get that only one member of your current board was on the board then, but the full current board should be concerned that this was a bait and switch. Maybe it was just an honest mistake somehow, but you haven't presented anything to the public to prove that. So just to finish up with questions, please verify if the original cost was 3.6 million. And please let me know if you have any further information from November on, has anyone found the minutes or the date of a vote that authorized that money could be used elsewhere? Thanks.
All right, thank you. Next up, Geneva Tella, go ahead.
Hi. Oops, sorry. I have a double volume situation here.
You're good now.
Geneva Tella, Ambler.
Wow, that was a very packed meeting, let me say. First, I want to say thanks to that company, ICS. At long last, this was the type of analysis many of us were looking for and was actually recommended by the Sandy Run Project Review Committee, which was now, what, 5 years ago at this point? I can't keep track. Time flies. But thank God, that was exactly what we were looking. That's what we needed. That's the kind of analysis we needed before we committed to $76 million building at Sandy Run, because this is another 40 million. And we know with constant tax increases, we really don't have this kind of money to do what needs to be done on all these buildings. The Dewey decision to use them, no offense to Dewey, but like enough already. I mean, we turned to them for everything. And I think it'd be nice to get some new blood around, some different opinions, some different people looking at it. I feel like they were involved at some point with the high school project, and we hear just from Anita there that we know something happened with that bus depot then. We know they were involved with working with the township to try to ruin our field of dreams. And I just don't know why we keep turning back to them. It seems like you already picked them, which I find, I don't know why we didn't have a board vote, but that's not my priority here. The bus garage. I want to thank very much Mark for finally doing the research. Again, history is important so we don't repeat it. Anita brought up some of that historical data, some historical information. I know we've been asking for it. A friend of mine had actually gotten an RFP to look at 12 boxes in a garage. These are all things to look at prior to committing to $76 million of Sandy Run. These are important things to find out where we got to where we are so we don't make the same mistakes. So thank you, Mark, for that. Many concerns about a bus garage, the least of which is the location by Fort Washington Elementary School. Also, the cost when we don't have any money. We just got $41 million worth of repairs on our other buildings, which we knew. I really hope we consider town halls while discussing this, so that people are well informed. I mean, maybe it just be Anita and me there, but I know people were very concerned when it was on the Field of Dreams in that location of Fort Washington and by those fields. And we are still looking for the answer as why it wasn't part of the high school build, which Anita brought up. And we also don't have the answer yet to why the township, if that was supposedly the space where it was supposed to be, you know, back in 2008, we still don't know why the township said no to that space, which is very important. And I really think we should look to alternative solutions that are cost effective. We basically have just used a parking lot in the industrial park, and there's plenty of parking lots to be used that we own, 6 buildings worth. And as far as I'm concerned, which Mark knows, I expressed this, the township owes the district money. They took money off the rolls when they built that library there, and that is a huge lot. We could park a couple buses and maybe even use some of their office space for our employees. I just want to say something about the cyber schools. I don't really understand it, but we seem to hate them so much. But I have to say that there's families that chose to go there because they were disappointed and nervous about Upper Dublin School District's capability of teaching their schools. And as I sit home with my kids 3 days a week, and they've only been to school 10 days, I have to say, I'd be a little offended if I made this difficult choice to send my kid to a cyber school only to be criticized and looked down upon by my district leaders. And maybe we should think about, why did they make that choice? What decisions as a board do we make that forced so many people to alternate education decisions that weren't part of the Upper Dublin school buildings that cost us so much money and yet aren't being used? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to speak? There we go. Lisa Burns, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me, Mark?
Yep, go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, Lisa Burns from Fort Washington. I'd like to know where we are with our 5-day in-person plan for middle school and high school. The last communication that was given to parents, I believe, was on January 4th. So the plan has not been updated and sent to parents, as far as I know, in the last 16 days. And I'm talking about steps to get us in for middle school and high school 5 days in. And I just don't understand why. with the vaccines now rolling out and being offered to teachers. I know we're in the early stages of that. I do know that some teachers have had them because I have teachers in my neighborhood that have told me with that and with other schools rolling out 5-day plans, I want to hear what Upper Dublin is doing and why the community has not been updated about this on a weekly basis. This is really right now the most important thing right now to getting these middle school and high school kids back into full day, 5-day in option, choice for 5-day. So after the vaccine availability rolls out and is available to all teachers, I'd like to know, I'm sure many parents would like to know, what's our next hurdle for getting 5 days in for middle school and high school? And can you also please speak to, back on January 4th, there was a section called the areas of criteria for the path forward. And there are 5 criterias that I don't think we had to meet them, but they were concerns. And I haven't heard much more about them. And I know parents are asking about them and they're confused what they actually mean. Are these boxes that need to be checked? Are they just there on paper? You know, what are these criterias and what does it mean? The first one is obviously vaccination, but then the next one is social distancing. The third is school exclusion guidelines. The first is quarantine protocols, and the 5th is surveillance testing. Do we have to meet each one of these to move into 5-day? And if we don't, what does that mean now? And when are we going to communicate that to parents? Each of those groups, I know things change every day as numbers change, cases go up, cases go down, but parents need a weekly consistent communication about where we are moving forward. We have no plan right now, and we're seeing other districts, whether you want to compare it to them or not, we're seeing other districts that are moving forward and taking steps, and I don't see anything happening with Upper Dublin. And please correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong with the date of January 4th being the last time I could find anything with a plan, please correct me if I'm wrong and point me to that. If this can't be answered on this call today, can you just email or let us know when these issues can be answered? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else like to speak? All right, seeing none, I will close community input and we'll see if there are any responses to these, starting with Dr. Yanni.
Thank
Did
you.
we lose Dr. Yanni?
Thank you, Mr. Sirota.
Oh, there you are.
Unmuting. So I'll start with the resuming normal operations plan. There are 5 criteria. The language says that the following criteria must be considered as we move forward from our current instructional models to our ideal instructional models: vaccine, social distancing, school exclusion guidelines, quarantine protocols, and surveillance testing. We know that the vaccinations have started. Most of school staff is included in Group 1B. Group 1A was expanded yesterday to include some additional folks. So after staff has the ability or access to the vaccine, both rounds of the vaccine, that will be the last real major hurdle, if we want to use that word, to more fully opening our schools. The 5 criteria are not requirements. If they were requirements, we'd list them as requirements, but these are things that we have to focus on and consider. We are working with the Office of Public Health, the Montgomery County Office of Public Health, on some revisions to potential changes to social distancing guidelines and also school exclusion guidelines. To date, nothing has changed. So we still need to exclude students that were close contacts, which means students within 6 feet of someone that tests positive for more than 15 minutes or more. And social distancing, they're still recommending 6 feet to the maximum extent feasible. And as we've said, at the elementary level, we're guaranteeing at least 3 to 4 feet. But at secondary, with the hybrid schedule, we're doing our best to keep to the 6 feet. We know that the number of cases regionally and across the country are double at the age 10 to 19 as they are for kids younger than that. There are a few districts that are planning 5 days. We know that Souderton has been in for 5 days for some time. I'll remind everybody that when they have close contacts and kids get excluded, they're put in completely asynchronous work with no connection to their teachers or peers. Not making any judgment on that, just laying out the facts as they are. And they've excluded hundreds of kids. Last evening, the Springford Area School District approved a plan to go back 5 days. It's important to note that only 44% of their students will be returning for 5 days. So the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit is in the process of updating a list of all the school district plans. And as I've said before, you know, and I don't mean this in any smart way, if we're going to compare, we need to compare with everybody, not just you know, a select number of districts. So we'll once we get the updated information from the IU, we'll make that public as well. We have finished the student surveys. We're in the process of looking at that data now. And we're also in the final stages of analyzing the data that came back from families that said that they were not sure yet if they were interested in a 5-day-a-week option or not. Once that is done, all of that information will be in next week's Touch Base Tuesday. We're hoping to have some updates from the Montgomery County Office of Public Health next Tuesday as well, and some updated guidance on when or how long it will take for the vaccines to be distributed for the majority of our staff to have 2 rounds of the vaccine. So that will be there. Quite frankly, until staff has access to both rounds of the vaccine, I don't see us changing anything in terms of doing a 5-day-a-week model at the secondary level. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Yanni. And just a reminder, the administration, that really was not a finance committee relevant. You know, finance committee wasn't able to answer that. That's a question for the administration. And, you know, as you see, Dr. Yanni was here and able to answer it to that degree, but those kinds of questions can always be sent directly to the administration to be acted in a timely fashion rather than waiting for a committee meeting. On the bus garage stuff, yes. So I did a lot of research on the history of the bus garage as part of the high school project. And learned quite a bit. I have not found any documentation yet. I still would love to find some that shows exactly where the $119.2 million number in the referendum came from. I don't have anything that shows how that number was developed, but there is plenty of evidence from documents later than the referendum that indicate that that the bus garage was intended to be part of the high school project, and the amount estimated for that portion of the project was 3.6 million. So I do agree with that comment that it does appear that the bus garage was part of you know, intended to be part of the high school project. It was part of the referendum number, and the specific part was 3.6 million. So I think that's all correct. I'll ask Andy or Dr. Yanni if you can comment any more about where that money was spent later, but let me cover some other ones first. Dewey Engineering was part of the high school project later on, but they were not the engineer that developed that part of the plan. They were not the engineer that helped get it through the township land development and approvals process. So while they did have something to do with the high school project, primarily as construction managers, I believe, they were not, you know, they were not significantly involved in that aspect of it. I mean, they were part of the team, but they weren't the same role that they served, for example, for our middle school project. We do not have a really solid answer about why it wasn't built as part of the high school project. I've done, again, a lot of research on that. I only have sort of anecdotal comments from people digging back in their memory. There's really no good answer in writing anywhere to cite about why it didn't happen. That really is the core question I've been trying to answer, because I don't want it to be a no again for the same reason. But we have been discussing it, this potential project with the township as well, to give them a heads up. We're nowhere near the point of wanting to go through any approval process because we don't even know it's feasible yet. But right now they haven't been making any noise to suggest that they are aware of a reason that it wouldn't go through. I will say there was a comment about the location. All the comments about concerns about location and the various other things that have come up will be passed along to the contractor for the feasibility study, so they can be considered as part of the feasibility study, and hopefully addressed as part of the feasibility study. So all of that will be considered. And then the one other thing I wanted to comment on, I think, was a comment about charter schools. I speaking only for myself, of course, I don't hate charter schools. What I do hate is the charter school funding model that Pennsylvania has implemented. I think it is just simply fundamentally broken. And I understand, it was all done with the best of intentions when the charter school model was rolled out in the first place. It just needs to be updated and revised. We've learned a lot along the way. There are problems with it. It needs to be fixed. And that's a job for the state legislature. I have made some of my concerns known to some of our legislators, and I urge others to do the same. Does anyone else have any responses to community input? Andy or Steve, have you completed any research on where the money that wasn't spent on the high school, where it was spent?
We know that some of the money during the actual high school construction was used to pay for the temporary transportation facility. And I believe, Mr. Leckman, I'll use your line, keep me honest here, there were funds used on Cardinal Stadium.
That's correct. There was a chunk of money that was spent to upgrade the Cardinal Stadium on the high school campus. And again, the temporary transportation facility was the 275 New Jersey Drive, right? That's where it was moved to from the high school when it was moved. So during the project, it was a temporary facility that was required.
That's right. Yeah. So to clarify the process by which that happened, the existing bus garage was on the high school property. It was to be demolished during phase 1 of the high school project. And so a temporary facility was needed right away in order to continue to provide that function while the high school is being built, regardless of where it was going to land. It just turned out that temporary facility ended up having to serve quite a bit longer until now, basically, until we get around to doing the right thing with it.
Correct, Mr. And again, just to make sure that's clear, the money that was spent from the project funds for the temporary facility were only during the time of the high school project, right? It's still a facility that we're using, but there's nothing beyond the end of the project that was charged back to the construction funds.
All right, great. All right, any other comments, community input or otherwise from the committee or other members of the board? All right, in that case, I will announce our next Finance Committee meeting will be Wednesday, February 17th at 6 p.m. And we are adjourned. Thank you all.